Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Michael Malice here. Before we get started, I want to tell you about something that's near and dear to my heart, the Free State Project. If you go to fsp.org/join, you can learn more about it. What's the Free State Project? The Free State Project is a group of people who have committed to living the principles of liberty. What does that mean? They all committed to move to New Hampshire to try to change the culture there and to form their own subculture, and they've started doing it. There's literally, I think, 4,000 people have already made the move. 5,000, excuse me. Here's why it's New Hampshire. It's small, third safest state for violent crime, number one for lowest property crime, lowest homicide rate, constitutional carry, castle doctrine, gun clubs. There are people there who have the principles that you and I share. You won't be the weirdo there, or you will be, but not because of your political views, because you're a freak. But that's okay. If you go to fsp.org/join, you will learn more about this amazing project. Now let's start the show. Good afternoon, I'm Michael Malice, and let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have a real treat today. The man behind the woman, Titania McGrath, one of the best characters on Twitter. His name is Andrew Doyle, and I asked you months ago to do the show, but you weren't out yet. But now that your book, Woke, A Guide to Social Justice, has been published, and everyone can get on Kindle, highly recommend it, you have outed yourself.
Yeah, I got outed. I wasn't outed. Someone did it for me.
How did that happen?
It was a mistake. There was something to do with the publisher. Someone at the publishing house accidentally put my name in a book catalogue at a book fair in Frankfurt, oddly, and then a website called Chortle, which is the comedy industry website in the UK, somehow got hold of this, and then they outed me.
Oh,
it was really invasive. I felt so used,
violated.
It was fine. Violated utterly, but then I thought, well, since it's out there, I may as well talk to people about it, because there's no point in keeping it secret anymore. It's a shame, really.
Yeah, it is. I mean, part of the fun is this person for real? How did the character get created? What's the origin?
The origin is I don't know if you know, there used to be a character called Godfrey Elphick on Twitter,
of course.
who was quite a well-known satirical genderqueer Muslim atheist. That was his sort of handle. And was a real kind of anti-social justice, well, actually pro-social justice, but obviously taking the piss. And that was run by two people. One of them is a friend of mine called Lisa Graves, and we were talking about satire. And I'm a stand-up comedian. I've been a stand-up comedian for many years. And I said to her, I really love what you do, and I think I'd like to do a character. She said to me, you should. Like, if Peter Cook were alive today, he'd have 5 or 6 fake characters on Twitter. And I thought, yeah, this is great. So I invented this radical slam poet, feminist, intersectional activist, because I thought that'd be quite fun. I just did it.
How did you come up with the name?
Lisa suggested it, and the reason I went for it is because it reminded me of Titania from Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. Because Titania is Queen of the Fairies, and I think the social justice movement is full of utter fantasists. And it just feels absolutely perfect. And McGrath is good because it's an Irish name, and my family are Irish, so that sort of seemed to fit.
My favorite,
nice. But I love the idea of doing. Go on, sorry.
My favorite Godfrey quote was something to the effect of, "I'd rather punch 100 innocent people than not punch one actual Nazi."
Yeah, exactly. It's stuff like Godfrey always used to make me laugh so much, and I wanted to hit the same targets but from a different angle, and so I went from the kind of the young privileged white woman who thinks she's really oppressed, which I think is a really interesting, and they're very aggressive, think she's really shocking, because there are so many people like that I see in the media and on TV that fit that sort of blueprint, and I thought that was just really funny. And also I just love the idea of taking on a different persona. I remember one of my favorite playwrights is Joe Orton, and he used to write letters of complaint about his own work to the press and get it published under this fake name of Mrs. Edna Wellthorpe.
Oh my goodness.
And it was utterly hilarious.
That's brilliant.
It's really good. Yeah, he used to. There was a really good one where some woman had written to the theatre to complain about the play. This was back in the 60s, right? It was a play called Loot. And he intercepted the letter And he wrote back as this character, saying it's absolutely violent, and said to this woman, I would like to join your campaign to have his work banned. So he was sort of embodying his critics in this fake persona, and I love that idea.
Are you like me? I'm obviously a Twitter troll as well. Are you like me, where the more vitriol you get, the more you like it? Because at a certain point, it's clearly not about you. It's about
Not.
It's if you or I encounter someone who's an utter buffoon in real life, it's like, okay, there's an utter buffoon. Yeah. The rage these people feel is completely out of proportion to encountering someone who, worst case scenario, is an idiot.
Yeah, and what you've got to always remember is you're not the target. They're not really angry at you because they don't know you. And I do quite I don't know if I enjoy it, but it does tell me that I'm doing something right, because people either really love the character or hate the character so much that they attack me personally on Twitter and think that I'm actually evil. And they keep telling me things about myself that I don't know, that I'm a secret fascist and I'm, this sort of evil anti-whatever, like this far right. They just make stuff up. And of course, I'm not remotely that, but they just decide it and they caricature you and then they go after you. So although it's not pleasant, I think it does suggest that the satire is hitting home. Otherwise, they wouldn't get so upset about it.
It's very odd, or understandable, I guess, why people have to ascribe, well, I don't like this character, I don't like political perspective X, therefore there must be a correlation. Historically, by far the most effective satires and critiques of let's suppose, the orthodox left have come from the non-orthodox left. So there's no reason, if you're poking fun at a certain ideological persuasion, that you disagree with their goals. If you're mocking the I mean, how better to mock a culture than from sharing its values?
But I think that's the worst thing, is because my background is very much from the left, and I think that really bothers a lot of left, because I think the left has lost the plot. It's gone completely into identity politics, and I think and this victimhood culture, which I think is really unhelpful and divisive. And if you critique that from a left-wing perspective, they hate you even more than if you did it from a right-wing perspective, because you're like a traitor to the cause, But I feel that it's not. I don't feel that I've changed my political views. I mean, I've changed. I suppose I've refined my views. But broadly speaking, I've always been the same. I think the left has changed and left me behind. So I just thought I'd like to poke fun at it.
Well, if Titania had someone in politics that she admired, who would it be?
Okay, well, let's go for Linda Sarsour, maybe.
Oh yeah.
What do you think? I mean, I think Linda Sarsour, who's so aggressive on Twitter and so angry and reduces everything to identity. I mean, when she was critiqued in this lecture at a university in America, and she refused to answer the question on the grounds that the person asking the question was a white male.
Wow.
And so therefore he's part of this sort of power structure of privilege. And it's a great get-out clause, isn't it? It's like, well, I don't have to answer your question because of your race and your gender, which is incredible bigotry, but it's dressed up as virtue. So I think that Titania would love that. Titania would refuse to talk to a white man on principle. She would think they're all privilege, even if you're homeless on the street with nothing and you've got a three-legged dog. She'd be like, you're still the beacon of privilege,
Yeah, if you weren't a white male, you'd have a two-legged dog.
Yeah, exactly.
Being over across the pond, your culture is much more stratified and has more of a caste system than we do. And you said you have an Irish background. I can growing up, we would see these stories about back in the day. In the States, it would be like, blacks not welcome here. In the UK, it would be like no Irish, right? And we can't even imagine what it's like for someone from that era to walk by a store that you weren't even thinking of going in and knowing preemptively you're not welcome, even though you're a decent human being. Yeah. So to have that nowadays, and we thought that was dead. So to have that nowadays be resurrected as, oh, you're a white male, I don't need to hear from you. Just the brazenness to me is shocking.
It's even more shocking because these people think they're the good guys. This is the worst thing about identity politics. It's rehabilitated racial thinking. And now all of a sudden segregation is seen as a positive thing because it provides spaces for particular types of people. I can't think of anything more anti-humanity, anything more divisive than that. And it's a real backward step. And what is troubling is, whereas segregation back in the 60s and 70s would have been based on this very evil idea that certain types of people are less important than others and less valuable than others, which is an ugly, disgusting, repugnant viewpoint. The problem with identity politics as it currently operates is that it is based on the idea that this is a good thing. I mean, I think a lot of these people really believe they're making the world a better place by dividing us all up and saying, we should have LGBT only dormitories in universities. We need to have days where white people are absent from universities. This is just rehabilitated racism and homophobia. That's all this is. But it's done with a genuine belief that it's good, and that's scary, but also worth mocking, I think, because it's got to end. It creates the conditions within which the far right can utterly thrive. And that's why I think the far right is on the rise, because of stuff like this. And I think it's really damaging. And that's one of the reasons I want to I want to mock it, to at least try and do something about it. I'm not saying I will, but hopefully it could help.
Yeah, there's something very absurd and ripe for satire when you see people who go to college who have inherently, you go to college, you're going to be a step above people who haven't gone to college. I'm sure it's the way over there. It's certainly that way in the United States. It's a very much a status thing. So to have that, you go to school and now you're in a position to talk about other people having privilege when you haven't even had a job to begin with, because of some inherent invisible cultural thing. Even if what you're saying is true, the analysis is never particularly insightful or original or innovative. It's verbatim the same thing. And I think that's part of the reason why it's so easy to just tweak it a little and sound realistic as the character, because the mantras are like fortune cookies.
But because it's not actual intellectual thought, it's a series of slogans. It's phrases like toxic masculinity, lived experience, white privilege, decolonization. It's all of that sort of stuff. Which these are just phrases, maxims that are used in substitution for thought and a thought process. They don't mean anything. If you get that down to it, toxic masculinity doesn't really mean anything. It's just something, and it's used as a punchline to an argument. That's the argument over because we've invoked toxic masculinity. Well, what if I don't accept the very principle and concept of toxic masculinity? Well, they don't have anywhere to go then, because it's an unreasonable ideology. The woke ideology it's impervious to reason. You can't argue with it. It's like telling. I always kind of use the analogy of a cult. I think if you're in the social justice movement as it stands, it's like a cult. You think you're doing something really wonderful. You think you're in this status of salvation, but you're doing real harm, and you don't know that you're in a cult either, and you won't accept reason or argument. I mean, it's like I'm telling them their God doesn't exist, and that's why they get so angry about it.
Let's actually break down toxic masculinity, because I think you and I would agree there is such a thing removed from this context, which is there's a certain type of personality where you're inherently aggressive, where you feel comfortable putting down others and even getting violent if it reaches a certain point, that you think you are born to basically dominate. But at the same time, there's nothing about that is inherently it probably correlates more with males, but certainly we can easily see a female having this kind of role. But if you told them this, is toxic masculinity solely a function of being a biological male, there's an assumption that it's yes. And then when you say why, it's screaming.
But this is incoherent anyway, because that line of argument is a biological essentialist argument, which is that men and women have these traits and they are embedded and they are fixed. Whereas, of course, the entire thrust of most feminist discourse is that gender is a social construct. You can't have it both ways. It doesn't make any sense. And there are extremely aggressive, unpleasant women. I know many of them. I'm friends with a lot of them. And there's unpleasant, aggressive men. I mean, that's just the nature of it. But when you start making assumptions about people on the basis of their gender, I get nervous about that. I don't think that's right or fair. Yeah. Toxic masculinity. I mean, look. There are women. I'm a very weak man. I'm not. I couldn't beat most women in an arm wrestle. So it doesn't work with me, and it doesn't work with a lot of the men I know. This toxic idea, but it's basically just a rehabilitated form of original sin, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like what Saint Augustine was going about. If you're male, you are essentially evil, and you've got to redeem yourself somehow. It's just bollocks.
Well, it's also interesting because toxic anything is bad. It's the toxicity that's the problem, not the masculinity. Toxic beer, you're drinking beer. A toxic hat, a toxic home with mold in it. These are all problems.
Yeah. Well, this is it. But because the woke movement sees people in terms of collectives and not in terms of individuals, that's why they have these big sweeping things like toxic masculinity, which they use as a shortcut to explain very, very complex things. Of course, there's a biological connection between dominance and masculinity. Just in terms of evolution, that's something we know. But that does not mean that in any civilized society that men are inherently toxic. It doesn't make any sense at all. And what I don't know why we let these people say this nonsense.
Well, I think you do know why, because in the sense of when people push back, even in a friendly, amiable way, like, hey, let me break down what you're saying because it doesn't make sense with my lived experience, the reaction is not, okay, let me explain my point of view. And even if it's immediate rage, but even if it is, let's suppose, let me explain my point of view, if you don't agree immediately to the entire worldview, then you're part of the problem, and it's fair to aggress against you to the nth degree.
Yeah, which is why I go back to the cult analogy. That's exactly what a member of a cult would do. You know, you're either saved or you're damned. It's really medieval. And also, of course, these people don't believe in redemption. They don't, they believe that if you sin, if you say the wrong thing, if you tweet the wrong thing, maybe 10 years ago, they have every right to ruin your livelihood and try and destroy you as an individual, destroy your reputation and destroy your income. That seems to be the strategy. And I don't want to tar absolutely everyone with this, because, of course, there's a lot of people in the social justice movement that don't do this.
Right.
But there's a very, very vocal, aggressive minority who do. And I think they are tainting the whole idea of equality, and which is something we all agree with, we all believe in. Equality and equal rights.
Yeah, it's. I live in Brooklyn, right? So when I've lived here all my life since I was 2. My upbringing, my social background is obviously very diverse in a real sense. I don't know how it is over there, but in America, diverse often is, unfortunately, a euphemism for having a black person there. Whereas diversity, as I enjoy it as a New Yorker, when my high school, for example, there were 30 languages spoken there. That to me is diversity. It's just like all over the map, quite literally. But it seems to me this is how is it over there? Is it very much like this kind of upper class white phenomenon where this is coming from, or is it all over the map?
It's interesting because I write for a political magazine called Spiked, and every year they do a study of universities in the UK to work out where free speech is being restricted. And again, what we find is the most privileged universities, the place where the richest kids go, tend to be the most beholden to this kind of identity politics, victim-centered feminism. So again, it's the people who are most privileged in society. This entire movement is a very bourgeois movement.
Yes.
Working class people don't give a shit about this stuff. If you speak to some working class mother on the poverty line who's working 2 jobs, trying to raise her kids, she wouldn't have cared if a woman was in the White House. She wouldn't care less if Hillary Clinton was there. That's not going to help her. That's just a tokenistic thing. Why does it help her to have some female millionaire in a position of power? She still can't feed her kids. They care about economic issues. They care about these are serious issues, particularly in America, particularly in the UK. There are people who have nothing, and then you're telling them, well, don't worry about it, because as long as we've got a black James Bond or we've got a pansexual Harry Potter or whatever, then it's all okay. They don't care. It's only people who've got the luxury of money and privilege that can afford to care about such trivial things.
Yeah, this takes me back to Marx when he was alive, and he would be with the unions who he's supposedly fighting for, the workers. And he'd be like, okay, we got to have revolution. They're like, we just don't want our arms cut off, and we don't want to work 20 hours a day, and we want to be able to put food on the table. So I don't want to overthrow anything. And he was very frustrated by this. And this is the same kind of thing when you try to speak for an entire population that you are not yourself a part of. On the one hand, there's an understanding that, like, and I feel this way. I don't know if you heard about this. We had a governor here of Virginia who, it turned out, back when he was in medical school, dressed in blackface for a party. Yeah. And I said, I'm not going to speak on this. I'm going to ask people who are friends of mine who are black, what do you think? Because I will never understand how that feels. So they will preach that ostensibly, like you should stop and listen and ask the people who are actually affected. But as soon as the opportunity comes, they have no problem speaking on behalf of those groups when the opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't want to speculate about motive, but it doubtless makes them look good. I mean, I remember I did a tweet as Titania about Anne Hathaway, who was making some very grand statement about the experience of being black in America. And I just thought, I can't remember what the tweet was, but I was basically making the point that why, a white celebrity millionaire, of course she should be able to speak on behalf of all black people. It's utter nonsense. And why do you feel you should do that? But actually, let's take that even further. Even if you are a black person who it does affect, Even you don't have the right to speak on behalf of all black people, because
Right.
everyone's an individual. Everyone's got different experience. That's something that you see all the time, don't you? You see people tweeting out saying, well, speaking as a gay man. Well, you know what? Gay men are very different, right? I can't speak on behalf of the gay community because we're comprised of individuals, not just big monolithic block. This is why everyone hated Kanye when he supported Trump. It's like you can't be black and support Trump. Like, that doesn't make sense. You're no longer a black man, effectively. That's the danger of this collective ideology. Is it patronizes and demeans people of color, gay people. It turns them into these robots that should behave in a certain way and will be punished if they don't.
There was this great moment where Don Lemon, who's a CNN host here in the States, they were talking about Kamala Harris, who's a senator from California currently running for president, and he was pointing out that her background is Jamaican. She's not an African American. She's a woman of color. She's black. So for her to kind of toggle that, it's kind of insincere. And he was talking to April Ryan, who's CNN's White House correspondent, and April Ryan was trying to be like, "What's the difference? What difference?" And Don's like, "There is a difference. Her family didn't go through Jim Crow. They weren't slaves." And April Ryan goes, "Well, what about Ted Cruz?" And Don Lemon goes, "We're not talking about Ted Cruz." And the idea that someone who's an African who lives in America now, Caribbean descent, African American, Diane Abbott and Barack Obama are not the same phenomenon. And to conflate them,
definitely not.
Right, in any sense, to conflate them simply because they have a similar skin tone. On the one hand, that's understood in the left, far better than on the right. People on the left understand, there is diversity even within these communities. However, as soon as it becomes convenient for a certain type of leftist, all of a sudden everyone who's black is the same.
I hate it. It's well, there's an example here which is a really pertinent one. It only happened a couple of weeks ago. There's a Labour politician called David Lammy. You probably haven't heard of him.
No.
And he made a statement about white celebrities going out to the third world, to Africa, to do charity work. And he said the optic of this is bad because there's a white person surrounded by black kids, poor black kids, saving them, and it's this white savior thing. And he was basically saying, enough. We shouldn't be doing this, right? And so in other words, he's speaking on behalf of all black Africans. This guy who lives in London who's got a massive salary.
Yeah.
Just because he's black, he feels he can do that. Now, there is a conversation to be had about, the value of aid and, whether it might be better to enable those people to look after themselves. That's sort of a better conversation. But just to say white people who go out to help, white people who give up their time and their resources and their profile to help people who are starving. I bet those people in Africa, they're probably just thinking, when's my next meal? They're not like thinking, oh, I don't want this white person helping me out. I just want to, how can a Westminster politician who's got all that privilege speak on behalf of those people who can barely afford to eat?
And is there no better way to share the plight of people who are hungry? I mean, talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Food is an issue, which is not an issue for us in the West. Yeah. So these people go on their trip, and sure, it's boorish, whatever. They go on Facebook. And that's a very quick way to raise even a marginal amount of money, could have a profound amount of difference in these people's lives. And they'll be happy to take it from anyone, even from the Klan, I'm sure. Fine, you're in the Klan, give me food. I don't care. Just give it to me. I'm hungry. I have children.
It's obviously a good thing to feed people who are starving, right? So, and you might say, well, on the grand scheme of things, you're probably doing very little. It will only help a few people, but to those people, it matters. And this is the thing: if you think of people in collectives, then it doesn't matter. But once you start thinking of people as individuals, then you understand the value of that. Even any of us just going out there and doing something, helping one person, that is helping that person. That's a good thing. But I think all of this is tied into this current trend to try and look oppressed, or to try and wed yourself to the idea of oppression. And I find this really paradoxical, the idea that there now is power and clout with being a victim. So the organizer of the Rhodes Must Fall campaign was a Rhodes Scholar who was receiving over £20,000 a year. And that was from the very foundation that was set up by the man whose statue he was trying to destroy, that he felt unsafe because of. And he was going on about all the time about how oppressed he is, how racist Oxford University is. It isn't. I was there. It just is the least racist place you can imagine. And he's talking about his oppression and getting £20,000 a year. I think I'd love to be oppressed like that. That would be great. What is he talking about? And that's what this whole ideology does. It turns good people. It makes good people do really, really bad things.
And I'll even defend collectives a little. My background is work with North Korea, right? So it doesn't even make sense on their own level, because the North Korean experience is not the same as the Japanese experience, as the South Korean experience, as the Chinese experience. So even if you want to look at it as a collective, look at it as the North Korean collective versus the South Korean collective versus the Japanese collective. That would at least make somewhat sense. But to ascribe it all to Asian doesn't make sense even in their own terms.
I'm not suggesting simplistically never think in terms of collectives,
Sure.
only ever think of in terms of individuals, because you can't do that. You wouldn't be able to study history or anthropology or anything. What I'm saying is be aware of the individual behind the situation. But you're right, those experiences are in no way comparable. This is why I really hate the phrase people of color, because the phrase people of color just groups together basically anyone who's not white. You know, if you're not white, you're over there, which that's what racists do. They just see white and non-white, and I think that's it suggests that, I mean, someone from sub-Saharan Africa has absolutely nothing in common from someone who lives in Pakistan. You know, this is or no more or less in common than they do with me.
And it's also kind of interesting, this idea that racism is a white exclusively or largely phenomenon. If you go to Iran and tell them that they're Arabs, the reaction you will get is not going to be a pleasant one. And in fact, I tell this story in my forthcoming book. I was at a dinner party here in Brooklyn, and it turned out every single person at the party was either an immigrant or second generation from a different country. So me being a troll, I said, let's go around the table and everyone say who your country hates. And someone said, well, we don't hate anyone. I go, well, who borders you? She goes, oh, we don't hate them. We just think they're dumb. So the idea that this is natural. And the thing is, when you live in cities, when you live in the West, you have friends and you bust balls. You know what I mean? I'm sure it's the same with Irish versus British, whatever. And it's a way of male bonding, or now it's just all kinds of bonding. You know what I mean? But for them, this is a way to divide people and hate. Whereas it's, on the other hand, it's supposed to be about celebrating differences. Which is it?
This is the weird thing, because actually the UK is one of the most tolerant countries in the world, but the left-wing media in this country is constantly telling us how racist and awful we are. Actually, to be racist in this country, it turns you into a pariah. You can't, and rightly so, and rightly so. And we've reached that point. It wasn't always the way, and we had to work hard to change the culture, and I'm really glad it's happened. But yeah, I mean, a friend of mine whose parents are from Taiwan, and she was telling me about how in China's she said there's so much racism in China. Oh, yeah. So much overt racism. Whenever she's over there, she sees it all the time. And it's this, what has happened is intersectionalists have decided in their tiny little clique that they can redefine what the word racism means, right? That it actually it means privilege plus prejudice plus power. That's what racism means. And because they see everything through these nebulous power structures, they say, yeah, but the white race are at the top of the hierarchy. And therefore, it's not possible, say, for a Latino person to be racist to a black person. And they call that colorism. They have to invent a new word to come up with the phenomenon, because, of course, that happens. But it doesn't fit in with their ideology of victim and oppressor. And that's all they've got. And it's absolute nonsense.
Michael Malice here. I want to tell you guys about BlueChew.com. Promo code Malice, BLUE-Chew.com. Do you like sex? I wouldn't know. But apparently sex is fun. What Blue Chew does, it's a chewable with the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis. It works faster than pills. You could take it in a full stomach or an empty stomach. It's cheaper than Viagra and Cialis. You don't got to visit a doctor. You don't have to have awkward conversation. You don't got to wait in line in a pharmacy. They ship it directly to your door in discreet packaging, and you get confidence in bed every time. You know what? For the first order, you just got to pay $5 shipping. If you go to BlueChew.com, promo code Malice, it's $5. That's cheaper than a coffee. Do you want to have the soy coffee and be a soy boy? Or do you want to go to BlueChew.com, promo code Malice, and be a real man? The choice is yours. I don't know how you're going to choose. Surprise me. What kind of reaction have you gotten on a personal level since you've been outed?
It's been really varied. I think the people on Twitter, that you tend to remember the most vicious, don't you?
Of course.
There's been some very, very angry people who have basically just gone out of their way to prove the point that I was trying to make. They've embodied the really offended, upset, intersectional approach. They're saying, as a white man, you shouldn't talk about this. I had a lot of, oh, you're a straight white male talking about oppression. To which I'd respond, well, I better tell my boyfriend because he's not aware. So I get a lot of people saying, well, it's just not funny. I mean, The Guardian wrote an article saying lampooning the language of social justice is no joke. Of course you're going to think that, because I think that if you were taking the piss out of me, I'd be upset. I wouldn't find it very funny, right? But a lot of people do. So it's actually, it's quite gratifying, because the people who like it really like it. And then you've got the people who really hate it, who are proving my point, which is, it's sort of perfect. I think satire is best when it really divides people, when it really polarizes people. So I'm absolutely delighted with that response. But some of the aggression on Twitter is a bit much. So people are really, really hostile.
Have any of your friends though? Did your friends know you were doing this character?
No, I kept it secret. I said to the publisher, I agreed not to tell anyone. Actually, some of them are a bit annoyed about that, like I betrayed them or something.
Yeah.
But look. Yeah, and I get a lot of that as well. I get messages saying, I had one saying, "You deceived me. I liked the character, and now I know it's you. You deceived me." And I'm thinking, well, don't authors always come up with fictional characters? Isn't that a normal convention? I mean, the people who say to me, "You can't write this as you're writing. You're a 40-year-old man. You're writing as a 24-year-old woman. What would you know about that?" It's like that's sort of the joke. I mean, am I not allowed to create a character who isn't exactly the same as me? How boring would fiction be if you started doing that? But yeah, some of my friends are. Some of them were a bit put out. A lot of them are really support. A lot of them really love it. A lot of them have said to me they've been following the account for ages and they've really loved it, and they're really thrilled that it's me. And that's really good for me, because they couldn't detect my voice in it.
Yeah,
which is really gratifying.
You were just mentioning, like, how can a 40-year-old male write as a 24-year-old woman? I don't know if you heard this. They're making a movie. I'm not joking about this. They're making a movie about Serena Williams, the tennis player, and there was pushback about Will Smith playing her dad, because they said he isn't dark enough. And he played Muhammad Ali, who was perhaps the most popular symbol of black radicalism, using the word radicalism in a very loose sense, here in the States. He changed his name to Muhammad Ali. He has very provocative political stances. He was a hero to so many people, very kind of in your face. He's not black enough, simply because of his skin color.
This is, okay, it's like they're looking for something to be offended about. Like, I wouldn't support the idea of getting some white actor to black up and play this character, obviously. Right? Choose a black. Will Smith is black, right? Like, the intricacies of how black. I mean, what are you going to do? Bring out a sort of color chart and work out whether he qualifies? This is nuts. Like, these people just need to shut up. They don't know how funny they are. They don't know. They are so lacking in self-awareness. I think the best thing, not even get upset and angry, just laugh at these pricks.
Are you familiar with the paper bag test?
No.
So, I'm so excited to get to tell you this. Back in the day, in the early 20th century and to the mid, I think, I'm not sure, there were black social clubs like Lynx and some others, and they were meant for bourgeois blacks. We're talking about how this is a function of bourgeois values, and if you were darker than a paper bag, you were not welcome. And Wallace Thurman, yes, look it up. Paper bag test. It's on Wikipedia.
Okay. Wallace. I don't think you're lying.
Yeah, Wallace Thurman, who was one of the writers of the Harlem Renaissance, my favorite writer of that era. He came out with a book, I think it was 1929, called "The Blacker the Berry," and the whole premise of the book was about racism within black communities against people who were darker. Because back then, and understandably for coming out of slavery, having these bourgeois aspirations, the whiter the person was, the more they could assimilate. You know what I mean? And people who were dark were treated far more racist in many ways than they would be by whites. Because I feel comfortable. Everyone has to look. It's just human nature in a very, very unfortunate way. And what we have to overcome, we shall overcome, is that we have these instincts to, if we're at the bottom, we want to push someone below us. So we have relative status. Right. And that's a very dark, no pun intended, that's the word, aspect of human nature that I think people like this don't even think about.
I think it's really sad. It's just really sad whenever there's any kind of obvious, I mean, it goes without saying, doesn't it? Like, any kind of judgment of anyone else on the basis of their skin color, it's unreasonable. It can never be defended. And I mean, you're describing a really extreme example. I've never heard of that kind of thing, but it just depresses me, that sort of thing, that would even happen. I feel like we were getting to a point. Obviously America's a very different case. You've got a much more volatile race relation situation over there. But in the UK, I felt as though, because of the political correctness movement in the 80s and the 90s, one of the good things about that is we did get to a situation where we'd sort of moved beyond racial thinking, and we started just valuing human beings as human beings. And I feel like the current identity politics movement has regressed. It's backpedaled. It's taken us back to a time where now we notice race more than we ever did. It's just creating these awful conditions. And we're seeing far-right crimes on the rise, white extremism, white supremacy, all the very things that we're trying to eliminate. And they're being fostered by this culture of racial thinking. And it really makes me sad, to be honest. I know I'm meant to be talking about comedy, but it just upsets me.
Well, I mean, I'm Jewish, and it's a very Jewish thing. You laugh to keep from crying. And I this is why I do like this sense of humor, because if you stop and think about how aggressive and antagonistic and nasty this really is if it's implemented, to me it's extremely, again, as a New Yorker, it's extremely disturbing.
Yeah.
The idea that if I go to an event, whoever I meet, I have to do some kind of analysis of where they are relative to me on some kind of scale, as opposed to hey, what's up? It goes against everything I grew up believing and living.
Exactly, because it's illiberal. It's fundamentally illiberal, and we should be. I think the way to. I mean, I don't know. I'm no expert, but I think until we can tackle identity politics on the right and the left, I emphasize this because I think on the right, you see identity politics manifesting itself in this very sort of xenophobic, racist, nationalist thing. And I don't mean disparaging nationalism full stop. I'm talking about extreme forms of nationalism,
yes,
where you start valuing people based on their skin color. That has to be tackled. That has to be. But the flip side of that coin is the leftist identitarians, the ones who see everything through the prism of race and sexuality and gender. Those and they're basically two heads of the same beast, and the beast needs to be slain, to be honest. And I don't mean that's an incitement to violence before anyone gets offended. I mean metaphorically, right? I know we can't talk in metaphor anymore because people are so literal minded.
Well, no, they're literal minded when it comes to people that they hate. When it comes to their own, they right away the person's poetic and using imagery and is provocative and thought.
Right, exactly. I mean, I saw this thing online the other day. The people are using the phrase "white genocide," right, which is a really provocative phrase. But they claim what they mean by that is just an acceptance of the idea of mixed race coupling and mixed race reproduction. Well, who wouldn't be against that? What's wrong with that? What's wrong with But why call it white genocide? You're obviously going to provoke and divide and make people resentful. Why take this approach?
Is there anything I like more than Heshy socks? Yes, but I still like them a lot. If you go to heshysocks.com, HESHI socks.com, and use promo code WELCOME30, you get 30% off. They've been my sponsor from the very beginning, and I wear them and I love them. You guys know they're the socks I wear at home. Why are they great? They're super comfortable. They're made with high-end Pima cotton, which is very breathable in warm weather. But they also have antimicrobial properties. Keep your feet smelling right. They're trying to get you laid, dear readers. They've got the fancy ones, the fashion ones. They've got the basic ones. You can wear them to work. You can wear them to the gym. If you use promo code WELCOME30, you get 30% off the already reasonable prices. So just go to heshysocks.com, HESHI socks.com. Take a look. You know you love them. Going for a hike, going for a ride, going to the gym, playing ball, you're stuck in the office. Having a good pair of socks is like having a friend for your feet. I wish I knew what it was like to have a friend or a foot. If you go to heshysocks.com, WELCOME30, you're going to get 30% off, and you'll be telling me, thank you. And I'll be telling you, let's get back to the show. Let's name names.
Okay.
If there's a politician that Titania would like, who would it be? Who is putting forth her ideas?
Let's say Margaret Thatcher, right?
Oh,
because,
okay.
She would hate everything that Margaret Thatcher stood for, every policy that she stood for, absolutely everything. However, she's a woman, and therefore she would see that as being that would trump absolutely everything. As long as she's a woman. That means that's okay. She can absolutely destroy the economy. She can attack the working classes. Titania doesn't care about the working classes anyway. She doesn't understand why people can't afford things. She doesn't get that. There's all these people whinging about food banks and things. She doesn't care about that.
There's this great meme I have of Thatcher just sitting there with her hand, holding her head up with her hand, and the caption just says, "Working class scum." And I just throw that out every so often. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
but let's talk about this.
We got to remember. I should say though, Margaret Thatcher was working class herself. I mean, let's not forget she grew up above a grocer's shop.
And was born there.
Maybe not working class. She was pretty poor. She wasn't like some big, rich, privileged person. She was just incredibly talented.
Well, no,
smart.
And she married into money.
Yeah, okay. So she married Dennis, and yeah, sure. But she had to work bloody hard. I've read her autobiography, and it was tough. It was tough for a woman to get as far as she did in a vastly predominantly male environment. And I should say I disagree with basically everything she believed.
So the amazing thing about Thatcher, and I find her fascinating. I have all her books signed. What people, oh yeah,
super fan.
People on the right don't understand about her, and this drives them crazy when I point this out. Margaret Thatcher was an affirmative action hire. Ed Heath, who was head of the Conservatives, said we need a woman in either the shadow cabinet or in the cabinet, and they suggested Margaret Thatcher, who was a backbencher, and he said, if we put her in there, we'll never get rid of her because she already had a reputation.
Yeah, well, he was right,
and he was right. They put her in.
He rue the day.
I will rue the day. That's from Iron Lady. That's her quote. And she ran against him as a stalking horse, took him out, and then she became the first female PM. So, but she got her start because they needed a token female.
Yeah, and to be fair, back then in the world of politics, I'd say that's exactly what you needed. It's like there are some examples of affirmative action, or what we call diversity quotas, where I can completely understand the necessity for it. In Northern Ireland, where you have this obvious difficult history between Protestants and Catholics, and the police were virtually all Protestant, you would need some kind of system in place when you have this kind of institutional prejudice to get equality. But the problem is that so many people now are pushing for these diversity quotas in areas which are already run by people who are obsessed with diversity, and then they're never going to be racist in their employment basis. And so it's a problem. It's another problem. It's a very difficult, nuanced issue that appears to be reduced to very simplistic solutions.
I think what happens.
Thatcher.
Go ahead.
You're saying about Thatcher a bit more.
Please. I would love.
I didn't realize you were a fan of it. That's interesting because over here, Thatcher's like a really dirty word. When she died, that song "Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead" from Wizard of Oz that went back into the charts because everyone bought it in celebration of her death. I got into the top 5.
I will tell you one of my earliest trolling incidents. The thing, I was born in the Soviet Union, right? So I'm aware of how Europeans see Americans, and they think, understandably, that we're completely ignorant about European matters. So this is in 2006, I was doing an interview with the Irish Echo. And I got on the phone with the lady, and I said, I'm so honored to have an interview with the Irish Echo. Margaret Thatcher is a huge hero of mine. And you could see the woman's cognitive dissonance where it's like, how does he know who Thatcher is? But if he knows who Thatcher is, he would know that's not what to say, but he's being earnest, and she didn't know what to do. So she just goes, yes, that's fine. Let's move on. And she just had a complete brain fart. But I don't know if you saw that movie, The Iron Lady, but I mean, I think there's a lot. She's a very, very fascinating woman, at the very least, because she doesn't fit into a box very readily.
No, I mean, Ireland's a good example. She was hated across the board in Ireland. I mean, there was the hunger strikers, and the way she handled the hunger strikers meant that she was obviously despised by the Republican community. But by the same token, the Unionists hated her just as much because of the Anglo-Irish Agreement. She just did what she thought was right, irrespective of how popular that would be. I mean, she's very tenacious. And some would argue that makes her a good leader. Some would argue that sort of bloody-mindedness maybe isn't so good, and that you have to be able to compromise. So it depends on how you analyze it. But I think even now in Britain, the emotions are too high when it comes to Thatcher. You can't really have a sensible discussion about her and about her legacy without it coming down to, oh, she's evil or she's brilliant, and it's very simplistic. Well,
and part of that is is her fault as well. I mean, she intentionally was very antagonistic. And there's this great quote of hers where she said, when before me, we had something called consensus politics, where everyone got together, talked amongst themselves, and worked out a solution. I'm paraphrasing here. And she says, I came to change that. Like, she genuinely, she thought the two types of politics, this is her own thinking, is consensus, where we get together, or principle. And her view is you have to be a politician of principle. I have this great quote from her. It's the frontispiece to one of the chapters of my book, where she says, if you look at all the great inventions of history, would any of them happen if you sat down and said, brothers, I believe in consensus? Of course not. You'd have nothing great, nothing of value. So if you have someone whose ideology is based on fighting consensus, even in principle, you can't be surprised when people react with animus. I mean, she poked the bear every chance she got.
Anything in terms of the arts or innovation, generally, if it's designed by committee, is probably going to fail. But I do think in politics, there's room for diplomacy. And I think, like I said, I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think being principled is something we all admire in a politician. But I think when that tips over into someone who is not prepared to listen to advice, that's never good for a political leader, I don't think. So, you know, I think it's probably a matter of nuance, isn't it? And I think where she succeeded is where she stuck by her principles but was able to persuade people, and where she failed was where she was too stubborn to concede that another way of looking at it might be helpful.
And it was her downfall, because it was her own party that took her down, because they're like, all right, enough, you're not listening to us. Let's go back to present day. One of the things she always rallied about in her lifetime was what she called the loony left, and Michael Foot. Was this a different phenomenon from what we're seeing now?
It's totally different now.
Okay.
Totally different. The left has been changed irrevocably since New Labour, since Tony Blair, Peter Mandelson, and people like that took charge of the party. Because what they did is they turned it into a party that is effectively centrist in terms of neoliberal economic policies, but has sort of progressive social policies. But there was only a kind of wafer-thin difference between that and where the Conservative Party ended up. So there wasn't really, for a long time in this country, a really kind of socialist movement or major political socialist party. Jeremy Corbyn is old school socialist, and that's why there is so much division within the Labour Party at the moment, because he's trying to draw it back to a kind of old school socialism, which includes Euroscepticism. And let's not forget that Jeremy Corbyn hates the EU. But he can't say that. He knows he's not allowed to say that. But, you know, so things have changed completely. The other thing that I've noticed that's a big change is this kind of censorial, prissy quality, which used to be the domain of the right. You know, back in the 80s and 90s, you'd see these articles in the Daily Mail, Daily Express, right-wing newspapers in the UK, saying, we've got to ban this film, we've got to ban this comedian, it's disgusting. All of that stuff is now coming from left-wing papers like The Guardian and The Independent. Something has shifted. Whereas it used to be that Labour and the left would stand up for working class values and the normal person, you know, the regular person, the working person. Labour has become, even under Corbyn actually, a really bourgeois party, and it's really weird, with bourgeois concerns about, really, they're worried about the working classes and their influence and how they need to be policed and how they shouldn't listen to the wrong jokes and they shouldn't watch the wrong TV because they don't trust them. And this isn't something that I recognised from the left when I was growing up.
Are you a fan, as I am, of who I would consider the original troll, Andy Kaufman?
Well, I don't know enough about him. This is a sad truth. This is something I do need to remedy. I know you'll be horrified by that. I know I've seen some of his things. I've seen some of his pranks. He did the wrestling with women thing.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
One of there's a couple of things. I'm delighted I get to tell you about him. He's one of my great idols. He had a character he did called Tony Clifton, which was Kaufman dressed in disguise with sunglasses. And he was this lounge singer who would be extremely abrasive and berating the audience. And he couldn't sing for shit, but he'd be there and he'd go in the audience and be like, what did you sit in some cottage cheese? Oh, no, that's just your ass. Just horribly abusive. And part of Kaufman's contract to be on the show Taxi was Tony Clifton had to do some guest appearances, and he got thrown off the set. And my favorite Tony Clifton moment, he was performing somewhere, and he said, you know, my wife passed away a few years ago, and whenever I see my daughter, I look in her eyes, I see my wife. So she's going to come out here. We're going to sing a song together. And the daughter comes out. Her voice cracks at a certain note. He slaps her across the face and goes, what the fuck are you doing? You're ruining it for the audience. The audience is mortified and booing. And he goes, don't boo. You're just going to make her cry more. And of course, this was an actress. It wasn't even a child. But this is what Kaufman did. And this is 1982. So if it wasn't for him, we wouldn't be around.
No, I love that sort of stuff. That's exactly the kind of. That's why I mentioned Joe Orton earlier. It's that sort of pushing on the boundaries and stuff. I mean, it's really sad in a way, but because I'm so steeped in British comedy, and Kaufman was just not on our radar when we were growing up, and he wasn't sort of. The closest we came was when Jim Carrey did his film about Kaufman, and that's when it became sort of more known over here. But it's not. It's something I mean, especially from what I've seen and from what you've just described, he sounds exactly up my street. I love that kind of. The sense of comedic sabotage and sort of taking people out of their comfort zone. I love that idea because And I'll mention Joe Orton again, because Joe Orton, I don't know if you know any of his plays. A 60s
No.
playwright, was really, really, really famous over here. He was really trendy and fashionable. The Beatles asked him to write a film for them.
Wow.
The script still exists, but it never got made. He was really subversive. His plays, they were farces, but they were massively subversive, and really shocked people. That's why he would write complaints about himself. But he actually served some time in prison before he became famous, because he used to go into libraries, take the library books out, and vandalize them in really creative ways. So he'd take some really sort of Victorian kind of moralistic book and cleverly insert pornographic images into it, or do things like just change the covers of books. All of this is available online, but he actually went to prison for it. This kind of comedic sabotage, which was really, really funny. I mean, if you look at the covers of the books, they are really hilarious. And they're still there, they still exist.
Let's talk. Let's talk about comedic sabotage in the context of Titania. Are you getting banned? Do you get suspended? Do people report your tweets? Twitter is very weird with parody accounts.
I get reported all the time. There's normally one every few days, because you get the email which tells you someone's filed a report. In the early days, I mean, she got 2 7-day bans and then another 1-day ban, and then I got an email saying your account has been suspended permanently, even though you can't suspend something permanently. But never mind. It's a semantic thing. But they sent this email saying you're gone. You cannot come back. That's it. You're done. And then lots of people on Twitter, lots of high-profile people complained about this, and Twitter reversed the decision within 24 hours.
Wow.
They got back to me and said, actually, we've looked at it again. You haven't violated our terms of service. It's okay. But it was great, because then I wrote an article about it as her, entitled "Now I Know How Nelson Mandela Felt," and talking about, and that was for Quillette, and that's online, and it's about her victimhood and how now she's used her time to reflect on her oppression. She's going to write a book about it, and it was actually perfect timing, because I'd already started writing the book, so we just brought the release date forward, and of course she got 20,000 extra followers in the 24 hours after that ban. So you see, it's the Streisand effect, isn't it? As soon as you ban something, as soon as you draw attention to it, then it just helps. But I couldn't work out. Now, I think Twitter undeniably has got an extremely partisan worldview. I mean, the stats are in on this. Colette did a piece about this where predominantly it's conservative accounts that get banned by Twitter, because of course it's just a group of people, in a group of ideologues in Silicon Valley, who at the press of a button can say, I don't like this, you're banned. And they're not answerable to anyone. I mean, we saw this on the Joe Rogan show, didn't we? When Jack Dorsey was asked about this by Tim Pool. It was absolutely clear from that interview that it is very ideologically driven. Their entire terms of service is ideologically driven, and is so vague in what it's saying, how you can fall foul, that actually anyone they decide can be banned without any justification whatsoever. And I think with Titania, maybe either they misunderstood the jokes and they thought I was being serious, and therefore they thought it was upsetting and offensive, or they didn't like the subject of the mockery, because of course it's them. It's people like them that she's mocking. So maybe it's that. Who knows? I mean, they certainly did that to Godfrey Elphick, didn't they? They banned him because they were looking for an excuse, because he was just showing them up.
Yeah, it's this kind of Stalinist slogan of show me the man and I'll show you the crime. So if they want to find something to ban you over, they will have no problem doing so.
Exactly. Well, actually, I think with Twitter, I mean, I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist. I think the solution to bad ideas is more speech, not less speech. I think that when it comes to Twitter, we've got a block button, we've got a mute button. I think people say horrible things, block them. I'm all for the block. I think just do that. They've got no right to be in your timeline, so just get rid of them. There doesn't need to be this thing where Twitter sets up this. They call them the Trust and Safety Council. I mean, are they trying to be Orwellian? That's the most terrifying name for a council, and they decide what you can say and what you can't say. And people keep saying, well, it's a private company, so they can decide what they want. And that's true. But let's be honest, Twitter is now de facto the public square. They are the place where people can share ideas. And therefore, we have to have some serious conversations. The power that these very big tech giants have to determine the parameters of public discourse. And although I am supportive of the idea that private companies should be able to do what they want within the law, I'm nervous about it in this case, because it does seem to me that their influence is now so widespread that there is some kind of justification for at least a discussion about the possibility of like an internet bill of rights or something, where we talk about online censorship, because that is what it amounts to.
Yeah, my position is this. And I'm sure you would have no problem if Twitter says this is a site for a certain type of left-wing conversation.
Sure.
But you can't have it both ways, in the sense that you say it's for free speech, and at the same time accounts that self-identify as parody. And you're not targeting people. It's not like you're going at, Barack Obama and saying offensive things. You're just pontificating your thoughts. That can't be on this site. You can't have it both ways. So something's got to give in some direction. I don't know if it's a legal thing, but clearly there's a dishonesty here.
But also, it doesn't serve their own purposes, because if you start banning predominantly conservative accounts and they all migrate to something like Gab, you end up with just a bigger echo chamber. You get lots of people on the left not talking to other people. You get lots of people on the right just talking to people like themselves. And we don't get anywhere. We just further polarize this very already tribalized, tribal kind of political system that we've got at the moment. It doesn't help anyone. I mean, the downside of believing in free speech is that some awful, ghastly people are going to say some fucking horrible things, and you end up standing up for their rights, not agreeing with what they say, but you end up having to stand up for their right to say it. And is never a good thing, because, of course, everyone says, oh, you're supporting what they say, because people are very simple-minded like that.
I would say their downside is when you're in power, you don't want people to have free speech, because then your power is criticized, and the more illusory and less and more tenuous your hold on power, the more susceptible it is to criticism, and that really screws you up. So that, I think, if the social justice war has got one thing right in terms of analyzing power, this is an example of it.
Yeah, I mean, what they don't, the worst thing about the social justice movement, and I keep having to use this caveat, it is the minority. It is a minority. It's a small group of people with a lot of clout, a lot of power, but they think they're the underdogs, don't they?
Yes.
They think they're the victimized. They think they're the oppressed. That's very dangerous, because actually they're the ones in control. And that's why when I'm mocking them, I'm punching up at power. I'm not people. If you're a bit feeble-minded, you'll interpret Titania as attacking minority groups, punching down at vulnerable groups, and it's the opposite. It's nothing to do with them. It's to do with the people who very high-handedly feel that they should represent and protect these people, and it's very patronizing. It's the woke movement that's in control culturally, even if it's not politically, because of course, we've got Donald Trump in the White House, we've got a conservative government in the UK, but culturally speaking, they've got an awful lot of power and clout, and people in power hate to be laughed at, which is why someone like Godfrey Elfrett would get banned.
What do you think of Sacha Baron Cohen and his work?
Brilliant. I love it. This is exactly the kind of sabotage that I really, really enjoy. I mean, some of the if you think about that moment in the film Bruno, when he's in that cage, that fighting cage, in really sort of aggressive redneck country. I don't know if that's an offensive term, by the way.
It is not. It's not.
Okay. Well, he's in that country, and of course the predominant feeling amongst that audience is one of extreme homophobia, and he ends up kissing a man passionately in this very dangerous environment. People are throwing chairs, they're screaming. He was in serious physical danger for doing that. But what a hilarious idea that he's duped these homophobes into having to watch a very sexualized man-on-man moment. I think that's hilarious. But what's brilliant about it as well is, of course, the sense of, I think great satire has to have a sense of personal risk about it. If you're just towing an establishment line, if all you've got to say as a satirist is Donald Trump is orange and he's got small hands, there's no risk there, because every fucker's saying that every night of the week on TV. There's nothing interesting about that to me. It's and I'm not saying we shouldn't mock Donald Trump. I think anyone in power should be mocked, absolutely. But it becomes a kind of oversaturation. And I think when there's a risk to something, when there's something like with Sacha Baron Cohen, when he puts himself in situations where it is risky and dangerous, brilliant. But people don't like him when he attacks the people they like. That's the problem. The same with Titania. When I'm not comparing. By the way, he's obviously far above me. But what I'm saying is, when I attack people as Titania, or not attack, but when I poke fun at people as Titania, the people who don't find it funny and the people who get offended are doing so precisely because of ideological, political reasons. I mean, if you look at the way the book has been reviewed in the UK, it's very clear that it's been reviewed on political party lines, right? People haven't been able. If you don't agree with the idea of mocking social justice, you will hate the book, and if you do agree, then you'll love the book. But why can't it be that you read it objectively for its satirical quality without thinking about... You see, this is what I hate. When I go and see a stand-up comedian, I don't want to just agree with them.
Yes.
I don't want just my existing views echoed back at me. I find that really tedious. I want people to say things that challenge me. Yes, sometimes offend me. I find that those are my favorite comics, the people who can do that. So what I've tried to do in a kind of humble way is emulate that and just try and, I guess, So her targets are all over the place, I think. But anyway.
Chapter 1 of the book is called My Struggle. So was that one where you were like, all right, am I crossing a Rubicon here?
I decided when I wrote the book, I wasn't going to self-censor at all.
Okay.
That was an experiment. I was going to say whatever I wanted. And brilliantly, I mean, the publisher I thought was going to come back with a load of notes saying you can't do that. And they didn't. And they let me say everything, which is great. But also, like, that's just funny. She's utterly ignorant of what my struggle means, what the significance of it means. She doesn't know. It's a complete inadvertent thing. But also it hints at this very kind of sort. I mean, it's not fascistic, but it's sort of an authoritarian quality about the woke movement. You know, I shouldn't explain jokes, though, should I? That's silly.
No,
I won't do that again.
I think that ship has sailed at this episode. When the mask got dropped. How did you get a book deal and an agent anonymously or pseudonymously?
I already had the agent. So,
okay.
I'm a comedian and writer, and I have a comedy agent and I have a literary agent. And the book offer came through the literary agent, and he was asking me about whether I could write something about woke culture, a kind of parody sort of thing. And I said to him, well, I've already got this account on Twitter. And I didn't realize he was following the account.
Oh, wow.
So he really likes Titania. And he was amazed. He said, he said, you know, I really love this character. I didn't know that was you. I hadn't told my own agent, you know, because I only did it for myself for a bit of fun. And then so I did a pitch as her to try and get it through the publisher, and they went for it. And then it's all worked out as after that. So I'm really happy that a mainstream publisher went with it, because I didn't think they would. It felt like a kind of niche thing. I mean, I don't know if you've read the book. Have you read it?
I haven't, not yet. Yeah, you mailed it. I haven't gotten it yet.
Okay, yes. Okay, so you should definitely get it. But you'll see from the book that it is. I have not shied away, because she is a kind of abrasive character, and I don't think it should be anesthetized. I think either you do it properly or you don't.
Yeah. Okay, we're running out of time. Time for the last question. What was your favorite part of this interview?
What is my favorite part of the interview? I think it's just generally a delight to talk to someone in a completely different country about things, you know, and to talk about politics with someone, and you telling me about things I don't know about, you know. I mean, that thing about Andy Kaufman, the thing about, what was it called, the paper bag?
Paper bag test. Call that? The paper bag test.
Yeah, like, you know, I'm just learning things from you, Michael. You're a great wise character.
Andrew, you are welcome.